ChaiFM, your station of choice since 2008.
Right now, though, I want to speak about international law, and joined on the line by bar-Yosfat, who is an international law attorney and a deputy director at Cahlet Policy Forum. Good afternoon, Ran. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on your show.
Oh, it's so wonderful to speak to you. So, Ran, with these Hamas rockets, I was just putting a scenario to my listeners and just saying, if it was South Africa and Namibia or Botswana or Swaziland or Mozambique started firing rockets into South Africa, whether they were caused by the weather, by poor weather, by wind, whether they were just testing them to see what was going to happen, surely we would expect South Africa to react in some way. What is the international law around this?
Well, unfortunately, as always, Israel has a different standards that people try to put in it. And I agree with you completely. The fact that the rockets, if they were intent to be fired at Israel or not, I don't think it's really relevant. My personal opinion is that Hamas were aiming to fire rockets in Israel. And they were aware of the fact that Israel will not retaliate in a severe way. But let's say that they're being sincere and it was actually just some sort of an accident. In case you don't know, every time when there's winter and when there's rain, apparently this is something that causes rockets to be fired from Hamas into civilian areas in Israel. And yes, Israel did retaliate, but in a very minor way, basically targeting some open fields and places where the Hamas terrorist organization manufactures rockets. The problem is that the international community is putting the pressure here on Israel. If you would read the articles all over the world, they would say Israel airstrikes Gaza because, and then only later in the article you see it's because Hamas maybe by accident fired rockets at Israel.
What does international law say? Is there a law that talks about this?
Yes, actually there is. Hamas is committing a double war crime because you're not supposed to be hiding behind civilians and you're not supposed to be attacking civilians. The problem that I think most of the world has with Israel is that we are stronger, and they are correct. Israel is way stronger than Hamas, and we also have less casualties. The problem is that the world, for some reason, counts the casualties caused by Hamas as casualties caused by Israel. And I'll give you two examples. When Hamas forces children to dig tunnels, and these children die from digging the tunnels for Hamas, tunnels that are supposed to be terror tunnels to penetrate into Israel, these kids who die in the process, the world says, okay, so you have 200 dead kids, and they count it as if it's Israel's fault. That's one example. Another example would be that a lot of houses in Gaza have traps, mines in them. They're meant to hurt the IDF in case the IDF will have boots on the ground in Gaza. When Hamas fires rockets, a lot of the rockets they fire at Israel actually fall in Gaza. These rockets kill Gazans. And again, when you count the bodies, they say, oh, so in this recent conflict from Gaza, you have, 200 casualties, and Israel only has 7. So Israel is the bad guy. And unfortunately, that's just not the reality, but this is how the world perceives it. And for some reason, sorry, go ahead.
No, you continue.
And I'm saying for some reason, instead of condemning Hamas, the world will find a way to blame it to Israel. Now, you want to say that Israel has problems? Okay, fine, we can argue. But the fact that there has not been a single resolution against Hamas or a single resolution against the PA, the moderates, were for them to sell your house to a Jew is a death sentence, and they call for a Judenrein, a Jewish-free area, that for me shows the hypocrisy of the UN in that sense, and also obviously the hypocrisy of the world media that covers only one side in a very unfair way.
I've maintained for a while that the United Nations, their relevance, their role is in keeping peace. You know, if we look at the Rwanda, and I don't mean to just be critical of the United Nations, but if you study the Rwandan genocide, they knew what was happening from day one. It took them 2.5 years to respond. You know, when your business is war and your relevance is about war, then you obviously are not always going to step up to prevent. It's a very bad business plan. I'm just saying. That's just my personal opinion.
So for the UN, you have two chapters in the UN that are relevant. You have Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. Chapter 7 is the one that's actually relevant to using force. It's very rare that they use it. Usually when the UN condemns Israel, it doesn't have any real significance. But the problem is that it changes the discourse. And that is the biggest problem in my mind, because today, if you go to the average person and you ask them, who do you think are the good guys and who do you think are the bad guys? The Jews living in Israel who just want to live in peace, and they have all sorts of citizens with them, Muslims, Christians, pagans, whatever, everyone has full equal rights. They're considered to be the bad guys, whereas Hamas, a terrorist organization that literally calls for the destruction of Israel and the murder of Jews, they're considered to be the good guys. So that it changes the discourse, and I think that for me it's very, this is a real threat, and I think that they're doing a very good job in that, by the fact that they're basically trying to manipulate reality to change the way things are. Just to remind you, in 2005, Israel left Gaza, but Gaza, for some reason, doesn't want to leave Israel. Instead of investing money in hospitals or in schools or in universities, Hamas are spending their money on rockets that are aimed at Israel and tunnels that are meant to penetrate into Israel.
What would be significant about rockets being fired now in terms of the timing, Ran?
So
do you think there's any significance?
No, I'll just say one thing. You can see that because of the administration change in the U.S., you can see that there are more attempts to attack Israel. But I've been following the terror attack reports from 2012. In an average month, we have 150 terror attacks in Israel. But the reason why we don't have any casualties mainly is because we have a real good security and the resilience of the citizens of Israel. But the Hamas terrorist organization are trying to murder Israeli civilians on a daily basis, whether it's in Gaza or if it's in Judea and Samaria. That's what they do. We're very happy that we're better, smarter, stronger, so we're able to protect ourselves from them. But that's their day job.
Yeah, I get it. Ran, that is where we leave it today. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining us here on 101.9 ChaiFM. And I'm sure that it won't be the last time that you and I speak. Thank you, Ran. That's Bar-Yosfat, who is an international law attorney and deputy director at Cahlet Policy Forum.